Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Oberian Synth. Wendigo. It smells like death out here. Babe, stop being dramatic. I covered my nose and carefully stepped over the pile of animal droppings whose smell had so rudely invaded my personal space. I can't believe you tricked me into coming out here, I said. I didn't trick you. I like to think of it as careful coercion. He grinned at me with that perfect smile and I felt my annoyance at nature slipping away. Dalton loved the outdoors and he'd been begging for me to join him on one of his weekend excursions into the deepest parts of the forest. I reluctantly agreed, but only after he pulled out the puppy dog eyes. There was something about those beautiful brown eyes that just melted me down. We had been walking for what seemed like hours, though Dalton revealed to me that it had not even been 30 minutes. I'd always had a taste for exaggeration. I've always liked nature, but purely in small doses. Dalton, on the other hand, was a nature fanatic. He'd spend days, sometimes weeks in this forest. Opposites do attract, I suppose. There was just something about the outdoors that fascinated him. Between the spiders and other various animals that could kill me, I was positive that I did not share the same opinion. "Watch out for that spider web," he shouted back at me as he tore through the thick collection of tree branches. "Fuck you," I shouted back, with a nervous laugh. "Save that for when we get to the campsite, babe." "Lord. It's gonna be night soon," I said, basing my information on the small amount of sky that I could see through the opening of our tent. "I think anyway." Dalton zipped up the tent and laid down next to me. I grabbed onto him, feeling comfort as I could feel his breathing. He wrapped his arms around me and kissed me on the forehead. I smiled. For just a moment, I forgot that I was now trapped inside a small confined space, helpless against whatever would feel the need to rip my face off and eat at my intestines. "You brought food, right?" "I'm starving," I said. "If something eats me, I'd rather it have a full meal." Dalton chuckled. "Yes, I brought food. I hope the bears like trail mix." "Damn, I was hoping for a 3-course meal, but that'll do. I guess, anyway." "You're so unappreciative." "That's not true. I appreciate that I'm still alive at the moment." "Keep it up, and maybe you won't be." He smiled and pulled me in for a kiss. It was always so hot when he threatened to kill me. "You see that one? The one that kind of looks like two people?" "That's Gemini," I said, trying my best to point out which stars I was talking about. "I think I'm a Gemini." "No, you're a Libra." "Does it matter?" "Well, no. But still." By nightfall, I had found one more sense of comfort. The stars. Living in a city, we could never see the stars at night. But here, I felt like I could see every star in the universe. It was slightly overwhelming, though my lifelong interest in astronomy helped us pass the time when I couldn't sleep. "Where's the Big Dipper?" he asked. "Ursa Major, babe." "No," I said, "the Big Dipper." Dalton always hated when I corrected him. In my defense, I couldn't help that he was often wrong. "I wish I would have brought my telescope." "I don't think that would have fit in your backpack." "I could have made some sacrifices. I mean, look at the sky, I bet I could see Pluto." "Really?" I sighed. "No, babe. Guess we both had our interests that the other had no clue about." We scurried back into our tent about an hour later, when I saw a huge-ass spider slowly making his way towards me. "It's only for a weekend," I kept telling myself. It didn't help. We had only been out in the forest since the afternoon, and it had already felt like I had spent my whole life swatting away insects and stepping over plants that I was convinced looked suspiciously too much like poison ivy. I tried my hardest, but the Sandman decided to skip me that night. He was probably shacking up with the Tooth Fairy. I guess I was too nervous to sleep, but at least I was able to feel comfort in Dalton's arms. I normally would have been annoyed by his snoring, but it was a familiar sound compared to the somewhat unnerving sounds of the forest. All the carnivorous animals stepping on twigs as they make their way to sink their teeth into my skin, and the sex-crazed mating calls of all the godforsaken insects that want to infect my blood with 1,000 parasites. I closed my eyes and tried to tune out the sounds of nature and focus on my husband's snoring. I chuckled a bit at the humor of that. I hated his snoring, yet here I loved it. And it seemed to be doing a great job of drowning out all the bugs and whatever else called this forest home. In fact, it seemed to be doing a little too well. I sat up and put my ear against the wall of the tent. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything but Dalton's snoring. It was as if everything in the forest just decided that it was time for a moment of silence for a fallen mosquito. I loved silence, but here it was simply unnerving. I tried to wake up Dalton, but he's such a deep sleeper that I would have needed some fireworks and an earthquake to wake him up. I grabbed my flashlight out of my bag and went outside the tent. Classic horror movie mistake, you idiot, I thought to myself, but I was curious. Outside the tent, it was pitch black. I looked up and the hundreds of stars that had once comforted me in this damn forest had been replaced by a covering of darkness. I froze. Fear. Shock. I don't know, but I couldn't move. The silence was deafening. At this point, even Dalton's snoring had disappeared. As if this situation wasn't already perfect enough, my flashlight decided it was the perfect time to begin flickering out. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen, standing in nothing but darkness. There was nothing but silence. Even my breathing made no sound. And then, a smell. Oh God, the smell. A smell so horrid, it broke me from my trance and I had to immediately cover my nose, but it was no use. The smell of death broke through the barrier and forced its way into my nostrils. I gagged and coughed as the smell only got stronger. Whatever was causing the smell was getting closer. Footsteps. I began to hear footsteps. Loud footsteps. It sounded nothing like something walking through the forest. It sounded like walking on concrete. What the actual F is going on? I screamed, in my head of course. Occasionally whatever was walking would step on a fallen tree branch and break it, pausing for a second before continuing its steady pace. My adrenaline rushed and I threw myself back into the tent and zipped up the door. I grabbed onto Dalton's hand, though it felt cold and lifeless. I looked at Dalton and he appeared to be alive. Just not moving. I held tighter onto his hand and threw my other hand over my mouth to hide my panicked breathing. The footsteps had gotten louder and whatever was walking had increased its pace. My heart was beating faster than a bullet train, and the last thing I remember was hearing a deafening, high-pitched scream before I lost consciousness. "Babe? Babe, wake up!" Dalton said as he shook me awake. I jumped up, hyperventilating and grabbing at Dalton. He threw his arms around me and I began to feel calm again. "You were screaming in your sleep. I thought you were having night terrors." My breathing and heart rate began to slow down. Was it just a nightmare? No, it couldn't have been. It felt so real. He grabbed my arm and I felt a burning sensation. I yanked my arm away and saw 3 large gashes going down my arm. What the hell? I said. Damn, babe. You must have scratched yourself in your sleep. Did I? Did I really just dream all that crazy shit that happened? No, I couldn't have. I don't ever remember my dreams, why would I remember that one? Am I just going crazy? Maybe the forest was just messing with my head. I'd heard a lot of stories about people going crazy after being in forests. I had never heard of it happening after just one afternoon, however. Though I guess there's a first time for everything. Dalton tossed my backpack at me. Get yourself changed. I'm gonna go make breakfast. That sounds like one crazy-ass dream. No wonder you were screaming so much. It was terrifying. It felt so real. Well, you don't have to worry anymore, babe. I'm here to protect you. I kissed him and listened to the sounds of the forest again. They were strangely comforting now. Maybe it was just your anxiety. You were pretty freaked out about coming to the forest. Maybe you were just freaking out so much that your brain decided to turn it into a dream. Is that how things work? Possibly. I chuckled and gave him another kiss. And another. And I won't go into too much detail as to what happened next. We spent that day headed north, making sure that we kept walking in the same direction so we didn't lose our campsite. We saw a bear once and I almost lost control of my bowels. In case you were wondering. It didn't see us or it would have done something similar. At least, it would have in my imagination. I'm tough as hell, you know. We got back to our campsite about 3 days later. Or at 6:30 that same day if you ask Dalton. It was ransacked. Our tent was ripped to shreds. What the fuck? Dalton yelled. What the hell did this? Some kind of animal, maybe. I was always super helpful in stressful situations. All our food is still here, at least. But we might have to pack up and head out early. We can't stay here with a shredded tent. It's gonna be dark soon, babe. He sighed and I could tell he was trying to work out a plan. We're still pretty far out. I don't know if we could make it out before nightfall. I don't want to be walking through the forest at night. You know damn well I don't either. Exactly, we might just need to stay here and put on a shit ton of bug spray. Great. The sun went down about an hour later. We lit a fire and just sat up against a tree. I had wanted to carve our names into the tree, but Dalton told me that it would hurt the tree. I was still disappointed, though. Without a proper tent, we were pretty much forced to rough it outdoors for the night. We decided that we would just stay up through the night and head for home at the first sight of daylight. I wish I could say that our plan worked out like we expected it to. After an hour or two, the two of us had fallen asleep, only for us to be abruptly woken up by a loud bang. The fuck was that? I whispered, grabbing onto Dalton's hand. It was suddenly freezing, even though we were still sitting right next to the fire. A fire which had somehow not simmered down even after we stopped tending to it. How is the fire still going? Dalton asked. The forest answered with an ear-piercing screech. I covered my ears, but it didn't seem to help. It only lasted for a few seconds, but my ears kept ringing. I felt blood drip down into my mouth and looked up to see that it was coming from Dalton's ear. He said something about his eardrum busting, but I could barely hear him over the ringing in my own ears. I got up and looked around. I couldn't see anything. What could possibly make that sound? Dalton got up as well, wiping the blood from his ear. He grabbed me and I faintly heard him say that we need to leave. Now. And that was the last thing I heard before everything went silent. The ringing in my ears was gone, and so were the sounds of the forest. I pulled Dalton's arms off of me and it was as if he wasn't even human. Just a mannequin that I could move and twist as I saw fit. This time, there was no darkness. Instead, the light of the fire frozen in time lit up the small clearing that once held our campsite. I heard footsteps and the smell of death found its way into the area. Instead of fear, I was overtaken by a sense of curiosity. I needed to know what was coming, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. And see it I did. Minutes later, a tall human-like figure appeared through the trees. The scent of death grew stronger as it came into the light. My stomach was in knots and I tried my hardest to hold back the acid that was climbing up my throat. The creature stopped and smiled at me. From what I could see there was barely anything holding its skin together as it draped over thin and brittle bones. Its lips were ripped, torn and covered in dried blood. It looked like it hadn't eaten in years and that had me very concerned for my own safety. It stood still for what felt like an eternity, just smiling at me with its rotten, black teeth. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but look it in its dark, sunken eyes. It lifted a finger and pointed at me, still smiling. I could hear snickering, though the creature seemed not to move at all. The laughing grew louder and louder until it was all I could focus on. And then it just stopped, and the creature disappeared. Sound slowly returned and I could hear Dalton calling my name before my ears started ringing again. I turned to look at him and he jumped. He grabbed his flashlight and shined it on my face. He told me there was something written on my forehead in what looked like blood. I went into my backpack and grabbed my small mirror. I sat by the fire and looked at my reflection. And there it was. On my face, written in blood. Wendigo. It seemed as if morning would never come. We waited for hours in the dark for the daylight but found nothing but darkness. I was starting to hallucinate, seeing things that weren't there. Or were they? Dalton would catch me staring into the trees, looking at something. When he would ask what I was looking at, I couldn't answer. My vision started to get blurry. I was seeing white spots and at some points, I just couldn't see at all. I could tell Dalton was starting to get worried. He started cutting through the trees and branches to make a path for us to get out of the forest, but it was no use. Every time we left we would somehow end up back in the same clearing where the fire was still going, though neither of us had touched it in hours. Dalton's hearing was getting worse by the minute. I would call him and he wouldn't respond until he happened to look at me and see that I was trying to talk to him. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but I was starting to get scared that he would lose his hearing permanently. What was most concerning, however, was the lack of sound. It wasn't anything like it was when that thing showed up, but it was still quiet. There were no bugs flying around or any nocturnal creatures roaming about. The only sounds were the ringing in my ears and whatever sounds Dalton was making when he cut down trees. It had been like that for hours, and neither I nor Dalton could figure out why. We were too concerned about getting out of the forest. Well, at this point only Dalton was. I had accepted a fate of being trapped in this forest until the sun came up. If it ever would. I laid down near the fire and rested my head on my arm. I watched Dalton effortlessly tear down trees and I wished that he would join me by the fire. I called him but he either didn't hear me or chose to ignore me in favor of escaping. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the fire come over me. I realized that I was starving. Before long, I could feel my consciousness slipping away as I drifted into the sleep that I had been avoiding for hours. I woke up to the sun shining in my eyes from above the trees. The ringing in my ears had stopped, having been replaced by an intense splitting headache. I felt lightheaded and sick to my stomach. Like I had eaten too much. Strange, as I remember feeling completely starved as I fell asleep. I sat up and saw that the fire had finally gone out. I guess Dalton figured out some way to finally get it to Dalton. Where's Dalton? I looked around and didn't see him anywhere. I called out his name and heard nothing in response but the chirping sounds of the forest. I began to panic. I threw my hand over my mouth and tasted blood. I looked at my hand and it was covered in it. I could barely see my own skin. I looked at my other hand. Blood. Everywhere on me, there was blood. What the hell happened? I forced myself to my feet, though it was painful. My legs ached and I felt like vomiting. I could see the shredded remains of our tent on the other side of the clearing, along with our sleeping bags. My backpack was still by the tree. I saw Dalton's by the tent, splattered with blood. My panic worsened and I could already feel my chest beginning to feel tight. I looked around again and saw nothing. I called out his name and heard nothing. I turned around to grab my bag and happened to glance at the tree we had been laying against the night before. Our names were carved into it. We hadn't done that, had we? No, Dalton wouldn't let me. But there it was, plain as day. The knife was still stuck in the tree bark. Right in the middle of Dalton's name. There was blood on the knife. I couldn't remember anything from the night before. I was sleeping, right? Right. I fell asleep, next to the fire. Dalton was cutting through the trees. Or was he? I couldn't remember enough to say for sure and none of that could tell me where Dalton was now. I could still see the path that he was cutting through the trees, so I stumbled my way over there. The closer I got, the worse the smell of death became. Strangely, I grew calm. The path he cut was short and ended suddenly. Almost like he had been stopped in the middle of cutting. Stopped by me. Dalton's body laid naked against a rotten tree. His stomach had been ripped open and his organs were removed. No, not removed. Eaten. There were bite marks all over his body. There was blood everywhere. Did I do this? I think I did, yes. I was so hungry. I just couldn't stop myself. I was starving. Starving. I managed to find my way out of the forest a few days later. I happened upon a search party that had been arranged after Dalton and I did not return home as expected. They brought me to a hospital and I explained that poor Dalton had been mauled by a mountain lion. They believed me. It was so easy. I returned home after a day in the hospital. They kept me nourished, but could not satiate my hunger. Dalton's body was never found. I attended his funeral just yesterday. Closed casket, of course. I cried as I gave his eulogy. The days move so much slower now. I can feel myself dying from the inside out. I can't hide my hunger any longer. I must feed again before I wither away. Maybe then I won't see that hideous creature I saw in the forest in my dreams. I don't want to see it smile anymore. I don't want to hear its laugh anymore. But still, it calls to me. It tells me what to do. It tells me where to go. It tells me I must eat. Second story. This story was shared by you/exquisite sociopath. The Wendigo is hungry too. In July 2008, I believe it was the 30th, me and my buddy drove to Manitoba in order to pick some medicines for an upcoming sweat. So we get to west of Portage la Prairie and my buddy pulls into a gas station because he has to use the bathroom. I begin to doze off when all of a sudden I feel two cold and bony hands wrap around my throat. The smell of decay fills my nostrils and it makes my eyes water. I have been hunting quite a lot and I have of course stumbled upon animal carcasses rotting, but that is a smell I would readily prefer over the smell that this creature emitted. I can't move my head as I try to see what is on top on me. I can feel tears starting to run down my face as black dots started to dance in front of my eyes. Bang bang. I look over at the window of the truck and see my buddy smashing his hands against the window. He looks petrified and keeps screaming a word over and over, but I can't hear what it was over the ringing in my ears. I read his lips and my blood runs cold. He is screaming the word, Wendigo. I think back to when I was a little kid and I had stayed out past sundown on a bitter winter evening. My father is waiting outside. He has a scared yet stern look on his face and he says, "You better get inside the house, boy. There are man-eaters in these woods." For years I pestered him over and over about what he was talking about, and that's when he finally tells me about the Wendigo. The ravenous spirits that look to possess weak-willed or starving people. They are cannibals born from the harsh circumstances of the great winters that have occurred. I remember my father said all you need to do is blow a puff of air at it, and if you are of pure and strong intentions then it vanishes in search of its next meal. However, if you are a greedy and weak-willed person it will possess you and make you into one of them. You will constantly crave meat, but only the flesh of man will satiate your hunger, but that relief is only a few moments. Then you will be on the hunt for your next meal, walking around the woods with a constant void in your stomach and a craving stuck in your mind. I turn slightly towards the beast and puff a breath in its direction. All of a sudden the horrid smell of decay vanishes and the hands disappear. I feel an overwhelming urge to vomit creep up my throat, but I restrain myself. My buddy hops into the truck. We are both silent as we drive on, our breaths are the only sounds to break up the silence. We drive for around 10 minutes before my buddy shouts, "What the fuck?" He slams on the brakes and screeches to a halt and almost collides with the car in front of us. The car turns around and we see what is causing the sudden blockage in traffic. A Greyhound bus is pulled over to the side and a bunch of shaken-looking people are standing beside it. Their gazes can only be described as a 1,000-yard stare. RCMP cruisers surround the bus. The red and blue lights dance on our windows. My buddy turns around swearing at the inconvenience and we drive back to a shady hotel we had passed earlier. The whole way there I am sitting motionlessly, a sense of dread is ever present in my gut as we arrive at the hotel. We check in and start putting our stuff down when my buddy turns on the news. It's a pretty shitty television, but soon enough we see breaking news flash across the screen and I stop what I'm doing. The news reporter looks shaken as she rattles off, "One adult male is confirmed to be dead in what is being called a frenzied knife attack." We are getting multiple reports of the suspect consuming parts of the male's body. The police have not commented any further. I look over to my buddy and he has gone ashen white. He looks over at me and says in a withdrawn voice, "I guess the Wendigo needed to be fed." The victim was Tim McLean. He was brutally murdered on Greyhound bus number 1170 by a man named Vince Lee, who was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He told investigators that God told him to kill Tim. Tim McLean was sleeping as Vince stabbed him and was awoken to a crazed Vince standing over him holding a hunting knife. Tim was stabbed over 60 times and dismembered. Vince consumed parts of his head and actually stuffed chunks of Tim into his pockets. Want to know the best part? Vince Lee was released with a new name and no criminal record. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and was excused from his actions. So all of the Americans that complain about your justice system, be thankful that they at least give out appropriate sentences for individuals like these. To this day I wonder if Tim McLean could see the crazed Wendigo staring back at him as he looked into his killer's eyes begging for mercy. Third story. This story was shared by you/chlorine bleach. The time I had an encounter with a Wendigo. To preface, I'm not the person who throws ish around like this lightly. I'm mostly posting this out of curiosity of other people's experiences with Wendigos/cryptids. I'm not even sure if what my sister and I experienced was a Wendigo, but you know, I'll let you decide that for yourself. This is also a long read, so I've, 23F, always had creepy paranormal experiences, but when I'm with my sister, 25F, the dial goes up to 10 on the creep factor. So anyway, a couple of months back my sister and I had to drive up to Colorado on a family emergency. Specifically, we were driving to Dillon, Colorado. The drive up was pretty normal and nothing weird started to happen until we got right outside of Leadville. That's when things took a turn for the decidedly strange. You can believe me or not about what I'm about to say, but even though it was late at night, I know I'm not crazy and my sister saw all of this too. So, we're driving and it's pitch black outside. There's very little street lamps, so the only things we can see are illuminated by the headlights. My sister is driving and I'm in the passenger seat. At this point in the drive we had only a few more hours until Dillon and we were determined to stick it out no matter what, despite the fact we'd been driving for nearly 12 hours at this point. Looking back, I kinda wished we'd had some common sense and found a hotel and never driven on this road at this time of night. It's about 9. My sister has the radio going. I'm staring out the window trying to stay awake when all of a sudden my sister slammed on her brakes. Now, for context, my sister is a cabbie. There's not a whole hell of a lot that would make her slam on the brakes like that. So when she did, I was automatically on full alert wondering what the hell just happened. Before I can even ask her what made her slam on the brakes, she's telling me to look up. No shit, standing in the middle of the opposite lane on this deserted 2-lane road is a big as fuck coyote. Bigger than any coyote I've ever seen. Not that unusual. Except that it was just staring at us, not the car, at us. It was making full-on, dead-ass eye contact with us. Obviously creeped out, I told my sister to just floor it because I didn't like the eerie, almost intelligent way that coyote had been looking at us. As we passed it, I forced my eyes forward so I wouldn't have to look at it. We kept driving, a little shook up but laughing it off. After all, we're both from the Southwest and there's no way a lone coyote is gonna spook us that bad. A little bit further down the road, I'm calmed down again and back to staring out the window. Maybe 5 more minutes pass before I hear my sister ask me, "Did you see that?" Thinking she's messing with me, I'm like, "No, see what?" As I turn to look at her, I can see she's spooked. Believe me, it takes a lot to spook her, so I was immediately concerned. She sees that I have no clue what she's talking about, so she says, "Dude, there was a hand that just came up out of the back seat and touched the dash. Now I'm even more creeped out. I try to make a joke out of it, saying how it's late and the whole thing with the coyote. But she's insistent on what she saw. So I ask her to replicate it. She gestures to the back seat and says, "I saw a hand come up and touch the dash like this." At this, she makes a fist and taps it against the dash. I shake my head, tell her I didn't see anything. That we should just keep going 'cause I sure as a hell am not turning back now. But oh man, that was not the end of it. Not even 10 minutes later we're still driving on this dark, windy mountain road. I'm looking forward, fully awake now and doing my best to take my mind off the situation. When I happen to glance out the driver's side of the front windshield. Again, on the opposite side of the road I see a woman standing on the edge of the road. She's all alone and just standing there in a torn white dress and barefoot. Obviously thinking that this girl needs help, I open my mouth to ask my sister to stop. Before I can get the words out, we're already around the next bend, and as I look in the rear view mirror to check if she's still there, the girl is just gone. Vanished. Poof. I'm really freaking at this point and I just want to get to our hotel. Thankfully, a few minutes later we were in Leadville itself. Which, TBH, at around October 11th at night was just as creepy if not more. I dreaded when we got to the outskirts of town and had to go back onto that lonely mountain highway. Mind you, we're still alone. We haven't seen another car in over an hour. Which makes this next part even creepier somehow. So, a few miles on the other side of Leadville, I feel my sister grab my arm. Again, she asks that dreaded question, "Did you see that?" I say no. Obviously. I'm keeping my eyes on my side of the vehicle and have no idea what she's talking about. So she says, and honestly after what happened after this I completely believe her, that she saw breath on the outside of the windshield. Not the inside, the outside. Like someone outside the vehicle had breathed on the glass. I'm really glad that I didn't see that 'cause I would have turned the car around. But at this point, we're both like fuck it, we're almost there, we can hold out until Dylan. So, like dumb idiots in a horror movie, we kept driving. I don't know distance-wise how far away this is from Leadville, but we came up to a weird parking lot area at a bend in the road. I think it was a hotel or something. I'm not too familiar with the area, but it was weird seeing a parking lot and actual lights in the middle of BFE, Colorado. I'm saying this to tell you that as we approached this place, we saw oncoming headlights. Now, mind you, this was the first car we'd seen in a long time, but if there was this weird lit-up building out there in Leadville only a few miles behind us, it wouldn't be that strange to see a car heading the other direction. Except, the car didn't go in the direction we thought. No, we both saw the lights of this car and we both saw it drive parallel to the road and disappear. Now we're for sure thinking we're hallucinating and making jokes about aliens. Saying how that was a flying saucer and we could tally that to the list of weird things we'd seen. With not much options left but to drive, we keep going. But man, that's when things started getting really bad. The longer we're driving, the more freaked my sister looks. At one point she tells me that the lane lines are disappearing. As in, she can't tell the difference between one lane line and the other. On a two-lane mountain road. You can blame this on fatigue, but my sister drives a cab for a living. She wakes up at 2 a.m. to go to work most days. There's no freaking way, no matter how tired she is, that she's hallucinating the lane lines not being there. I can see them just fine, but she swears up and down that she can't see lanes on either side. I think it was only her experience as a cab driver that saved our asses. Now this next part is going to sound insane, and I don't blame anyone for not believing me. I wouldn't believe me if I didn't experience it myself. So, we got the lane lines disappearing, cars disappearing off the road, weird shit breathing on the windshield, and the icing on this cake is that now it feels like the car is doing a free fall down the mountain. No, not like we're out of control. Like there's an invisible force pushing us from behind and trying to make us go down the mountain faster. My sister is riding the brakes like hell, and I'm trying to figure out why it feels like we're in free fall when we're on a less than 20-degree slope. It makes no sense. And as I'm thinking this, I hear my sister ask me, "Hey, is it windy outside?" I shake my head, check my phone, and am like, no, there's no wind outside at all. In the car you would have been able to hear the wind and feel it pushing on all sides, not just the back. Wind makes a very distinctive noise, and so I know that there wasn't any wind that night. That doesn't explain, however, why when my sister told me to look at the trees on either side of the road, they were swaying, bending back and forth like there's a storm outside. But there's no storm. There's no wind. No clouds. Nothing. Nothing that could explain why these trees are moving like this. I'm really freaked out now, and I start to pray. I'm religious to a point, and I'm not ashamed to say that I pray when I get scared like this, and I was terrified. Because underneath all of the crazy, this strange, eerie feeling was creeping up on me. It felt like there was something in the woods watching us. The trees felt almost alive, and there was just a darkness. I don't know how else to explain it, it was just evil. It felt evil and wrong, and I just did not want to be there anymore. I started praying harder and told my sister to drive as fast as she could away from that place, which TBH with everything going on wasn't that fast. For some reason, I just keep repeating, there's something bad here, something bad happened here, I don't like it. Saying that over and over again. So, of course, my sister asks, what do I mean and why do I keep saying that? Now, I'm not sure if I'm a medium, but I would consider myself a sensitive. I can pick up on the energy of spirits and places. So, like a dumbass, I open myself up to whatever the fuck this thing is. I can hear my sister asking me what happened. And the word that came out of my mouth, in an inhuman guttural growl, was murder. That voice was not my voice. That thing was not human. As soon as that word left my mouth, I burst into tears. I was so scared. I clutched my Mary medallion and I held my sister's hand. I made her pray the prayer of Saint Michael with me. And when we were praying, it was almost like she couldn't get the words out. Like, something was trying to stop her from praying. I haven't been that scared of something paranormal in a very long time, and I never, ever, want to drive that stretch of road at night ever again. Could we have been hallucinating? Sure. But this next part somehow creeps me out even more. So, we're at the hotel now and we're in our room. Both talking about how crazy that all was. When my sister says, "You didn't see it, did you?" And of course, I'm like, see what? She tells me and I believe her, because she was dead serious. My sister can't lie if her life depended upon it, because she just starts laughing. It's her tell. That's how I knew she at least believed what she saw. She told me that she saw a skeletal figure, like a human figure in the woods. It was all bone with rotten flesh hanging off it. Even though its body was human, she said that it had the head of a deer and glowing red eyes. She looked so scared, I don't know how I couldn't have believed her. According to my sister, she saw this thing tailing the car the moment we both noticed the trees moving, also about halfway or a third of the way down. Needless to say, I was pretty glad that she told me that after we got to the hotel. Now, one last thing before I wrap this up. So, my stepmom is from the Denver area and just so happened to have family in Dillon. I casually asked her if she'd ever experienced anything weird on that road, and I didn't even have to tell her which one for her to know the road I was talking about. She said when she was a kid it used to freak the hell out of her. She can remember falling asleep in the car and then whenever they got to that stretch of road automatically waking up because she was too scared to sleep. And the thing about the car driving parallel to the road? Well, my stepmom said, and I haven't confirmed this so take this with a grain of salt, that the roads used to be built differently back in the day. That they would have run parallel to the mountain and not alongside it. She also told me a story of when she was a teenager about how there was a time she and her dad were driving on the road at night. She's in the passenger seat for context. She remembers looking up and seeing oncoming headlights in their lane, screaming and then throwing her hands up out of reflex. Her dad swerves, almost crashes, and then asks her what's wrong. My stepmom, confused, asks him if he saw that car just now and he says no, of course. TBH, that just confirmed it for me. Oh, and the whole thing about that weird voice. My sister said that when I spoke in that tone, it was about 2 octaves deeper than my natural voice, completely flat, and absolutely not human. Me and my sister both agree that whatever that entity was that she saw was absolutely trying to harm, if not kill us. We both think that it was screwing with her about the lane lines and trying to push us off the mountain. For what purpose, I still don't know, but I honestly don't think I want to. We also agreed that all the freaky shit we saw before was something trying to warn us. The primary reason? That hand with a fist in sign language can mean, stop. I think it's possible those other entities were trying to tell us to turn around. Too bad we didn't listen, lol. But anyway, that's my story of a possible encounter with a Wendigo and other things that go bump in the night. I never have and never will again drive the road between Leadville and Dillon at night or any other time. So I'm just curious. Has anyone else had an experience like this there? Or an experience like this in general? 4th story. This story was shared by you/jokes0nme. Wendigo encounter. So I don't really know how to start this, so I'm just gonna spew out some stuff and hope it all makes sense, because it sure as hell doesn't to me. Have any of you even encountered one before? If not, let me tell, these things are not like how Google or any of pictures you find depicts them, at least not right away. Let's get into it. I'm from Canada and I live on a reserve that's about 30 minutes from any town, relatively close compared to other places I've been. Well, it's the end of December and just getting finished with holidays and spending it relatively alone, thanks to COVID. I get a call from one of my friends. He wants to go hunting. Well, that's kind of a problem, cause I've never shot a gun or went hunting before. Pretty pathetic for a Native American if you ask me, but anyways, he tells me he just needs my eyes and another set of legs to help carry whatever he catches. So I agree, making one of the biggest mistakes I would come to regret. So he picks me up in his crappy old Ford truck he uses for hunting, tells me we are going deep into the bush and we'll find a spot to camp along the way. So we drive about 20 minutes into the woods following what little road is left, and we get to a point where we have to continue on foot. We unload our gear and supplies and carry it till we find a nice clearing with room for everything. After we set up camp, we begin our trek into the woods, going farther than I had gone before. Saw a couple of bucks and rabbits, nothing too spectacular, so we keep looking cause he wants the big daddy buck, and we come to this other clearing much larger than the one we are camping at, and something about this part of the woods just feels off. It had a heavy feeling to, like the air was thick and just had a disorienting aura about this place. But we hadn't caught anything yet and were getting hungry, so we spot a rabbit in the middle of this clearing. Buddy lines up the shot and bam, we have dinner. So being the one without the gun, I go to get our little dinner in the middle of this clearing, and I notice something odd, that it's a perfect circle, no tree stumps, no sign that any human had made this gigantic circle. I also happen to notice what look like claw marks on the trees surrounding the area. Buddy said it's from bears sharpening their claws and marking territory, but the marks were so deep into the trees it seemed off. Anyways, it's dark out now and we are back at our campsite eating and talking about how crazy this pandemic shit is. I also brought up the clearing we were at and how weird it felt to me. I wanted to know if he felt like that too, or if I was just exaggerating. My anxiety makes me do that sometimes. To which he said, yeah, he noticed the change in the air too and said it made him feel dizzy and worn out, but he also said it just could have been from the long day we had. So on that note, it was time for bed. We both slept in same tent. It's the middle of winter and bundling up can only do so much, plus he was like a brother to me, so not a big deal. It had to be around 1 a.m. when we both woke up to sound of the most horrible scream I'd ever heard. What that fuck was that, was my first though. I'm guessing my friend was thinking the thing as he looked at me with fear on his face. I know, because I was afraid too. So he grabs his gun, loads around, and we just sit there for a while and listen. Now I know my friend is at least safe, he's got a gun, but I have nothing. Fear and my anxiety start getting the better of me, so I ask, where's the hatchet we used to split wood? Out there by the fire, he said, so I tell him I'm gonna open the tent, grab the hatchet, and when I jump in you seal the thing back up. I open the tent and as fast as I can bolt out to grab that hatchet. As I go to turn around with hatchet in hand, I'm quickly greeted by my friend shoving me down by the back of my neck. He put his finger up to his mouth to tell me to be quiet, and we listen. In the distance I can hear the slow sound of crunching snow and a faint high-pitched guttural growl. Now I'm in full panic mode. We don't even have to say anything to each, cause we both know our hunting trip was over and it was time to leave. All we had to do was make it to the truck. In the dead of night, it sounded so easy. But it was not, and I knew that from the moment my friend said, I'm gonna fire a warning shot. But before I could even open my mouth to tell him no, it was too late. The shot rang in the distance and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard it, a scream so soul-piercing it felt like it lasted forever. It definitely echoed much further than this gunshot did. It was petrifying. I'd never heard such a haunting scream before, that I was literally frozen in fear. Then we could hear whatever made this scream was charging right for us, with the sound of crunching snow getting closer and closer. We looked at each other and just ran in the direction of the truck, frantically sprinting, calling out to each other to make sure the other hadn't fallen behind. We're almost there, we kept telling each other as we are weaving through trees, making a beeline to the truck, trying to ignore the sound of this growl that sounds like it's right in my ear. But I can see the truck, we're gonna make it, we're getting out of here. As we come up to the truck, my friend makes it to his side and unlocks both passenger and driver side at the same time. As I open the door, he does too at the same time, and then he's gone in a flash of white. This thing had gotten him, ran at him with such force that when it tackled him it shook the truck side to side. I stood there in shock. I call out to him, but all I can hear are screams and a couple gunshots and then dead silence again. I know in my heart that my friend is dead, and so am I if I don't get the fuck out of here. I go over to the driver's side and find the keys on the ground. He must have let them go when he got tackled. I hop and start the damn thing, whip it around in the direction I needed to get out of here. Then I saw it. Skin as white as snow, completely hairless. Eyes that had sunken into its head made dark circles around eyes that were just as white as its skin, no nose, teeth so jagged and sharp shined with the color of blood, and its lips looked like they had been chewed off, so all you're staring at is teeth. Its body was so disproportioned, but with long lanky limbs. This thing is blocking me from leaving, but I'm getting out of here no matter what. I floor it with the tires spinning. I shoot forward and so does it, screaming that blood-curdling scream as it charges at me. Now I'm getting up close and personal as this thing lunges at the truck and bounces off the hood and over top of the truck. As I'm speeding away, I glance at the rear view mirror and witness this thing get up and just stand there watching me drive off with its head tilted slightly. I knew I had just escaped death with the price of losing my friend. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Symphony of Sin. There's something evil lurking in Hoosier National Forest. I've been more than a little hesitant to post this, but after what just happened on my last hike, I feel like there's no other choice. The parks may suffer for it, but people have to know. There's something evil in Hoosier National Forest. Possibly more than one. I've had similar encounters in multiple parks within HNF. Enough to make me question if one thing could be responsible for all of them. I've been followed on trails before. I've heard voices out in the woods that couldn't possibly be real, people who are too far away to be there, people who are dead. I once heard my granny's voice coming from a cave in Hemlock Cliffs. On my last hike, I went to Mogan Ridge, hiked the East Trail. It was scenic and beautiful. A nice day, if a little humid, not too sunny, not too windy. The hike was going wonderfully. Until I realized that something was following me. I've seen and heard a lot of weird things in the woods, but this blows them all out of the water. Or woods, rather. Nothing I've seen or heard has ever come close to being this. I was about 3 miles out when I started putting together the weird sounds. Crunching noises, like someone chewing on ice mixed with joints rolling, coupled with a slithering sound like something heavy being dragged through the leaf litter. I was out there with a friend, because hiking alone is stupid and dangerous. I noticed the sounds first. I stopped walking to listen for a second. I think I said something like, "Hey, John, do you hear that?" When my friend stopped to listen too, the slithering stopped. The crunching kept going, though. It was a really nasty sound, the kind you can feel in your neck that makes your spine want to twist up. Like somebody chomping down on something hard, like that sound when you roll your neck or crack your knuckles. The kind of sound you can feel in the fillings of your teeth. It was unsettling enough that neither of us wanted to stick around and find out what was making the noises. Neither John or I are fearful people, but something about those crunching noises sounded wrong, out of place and threatening. We started walking again, and the slithering started up again. At first we thought maybe it was my walking stick making the dragging noise, but when I held it up away from the ground, the slithering didn't stop. John suggested weakly that maybe we were dragging our feet and that was what was making the noise, but we both knew that wasn't it. The trail was too steep and too rocky to drag your feet on. Our next guess was a snake, but snakes in Indiana don't get big enough to make dragging sounds like whatever was making that creepy slithering sound. That was about when we started to hear the heavy breathing, like somebody behind us was panting down our necks. Once that started up, we really began shitting ourselves with fear. Because black bears have been sighted recently in Harrison County, a stone's throw from Perry County where Mogan Ridge is. We were certain that any second a bear was going to jump out of a stand of trees and eat us both alive until the whispering started. At that moment, we knew it was not a bear. Bears do not whisper. Nothing in the woods whispers. Not even mockingbirds. That just made it so much worse. Because whatever was breathing down our necks, whatever was crunching and slithering behind us, it was speaking, and it knew our names. John, John. Ash, Ash. John, 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 Ash, Ash, Ash. Look at me, John, look at me. Ash, look at me. Turn around, turn around, turn around. Look at me. And all the while it whispered, the chomping sounds continued. I began to fear that those sounds were it chewing on the bones of the last hiker to come through here. I braved a glance over at John, and John braved a glance over at me, and there were tears running down his face like the Ohio River was flowing out of his eyeballs. I can only assume the same look of terror and despair was etched into my own face. I wanted nothing more than to run away, run all the way to the end of the trail and get in the car and never, ever come back here. To never go within 10 feet of another tree ever again. But the hill we were climbing was too steep to run up. I could only walk, slowly, up the hill, this thing behind me all the while, whispering to me, saying my name. I don't know how long it went on, hours, maybe. It felt like days. We ran whenever we could, wherever the ground was flat enough, we ran. But no matter how fast we went, we could never seem to outrun it. It was always right behind us, whispering in our ears. Ash, 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 such a waste of talent, such a waste of potential. Will your parents miss you, when I've stripped the skin from your flesh? Will they notice you're gone when I've sucked the marrow from your bones? I thought the nightmare would never end. I thought I'd die on that trail, my bones picked clean and scattered among the rocks, no one would ever know where I'd gone. That I'd dragged my friend to death alongside me. I've never run so fast as I did when I realized the trail had begun to loop back around to the trailhead, that I was almost to the car, only a quarter mile more to go. I don't remember falling, I only remember something grabbing my ankle and pulling me down, dragging me backwards. The sound of my own screams ringing in my ears. John screaming. John pulling on my arm, dragging me out of the creature's grip. Crawling up the last hill on my hands and knees, rocks slicing into my skin. Screaming. And then light. The parking lot. John pulling me back to my feet, running to the car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, I looked back, and I saw it. Tall, corpse pale, skeletal, skin stretched taut over bones. Hunched over on all fours, limbs inhumanly long with too many joints. No eyes, only gaping holes in its face. A grin of blackened razors as it watches us pull away, lifting one skeletal arm up to wave at us, a single human arm clutched in its grip, torn off at the shoulder. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.